Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, honoured guests, for being here. Yes, 4 years ago on this platform, I gave my first ever speech to a political party's conference. I was simply a lawyer working in the city. I wasn't a member, but I was frustrated about the way that EU regulations were impacting my industry. I was concerned about the way the government allowed this to happen. And I was saddened that instead of helping our industry, they simply ignored it when we should have been free in the global economy to actually build. Well, 4 years later, I can tell you, I am a member, I am an activist, I am a campaigner, I am your spokesman, I am one of you, and by goodness, it's great to be back. There is a Chinese proverb that we live in interesting times, but I actually believe we always live in interesting times. But for so many in this country and across Europe, the times aren't interesting. They're a time of struggle. Struggle to pay the bills and find the money to pay the energy. A struggle to find a job and keep it in uncertain times. A struggle to remain healthy when the stresses of life are burdening them. My role as UKIP's economic spokesman is to develop policy and ensure that we have the right economic future so that those people no longer have to think about a struggle, but they can look positively to the future for themselves, their families, and their children. We must let human dignity be the simple touchstone of our beliefs and be the measure of our success. And in doing so, we must answer the questions that they will ask of us. How will you achieve that success? How will you manage our taxes and spending? How will you manage our country inside and, in my view, outside of the European Union? Only by setting out a strong and robust economic case on the economy will we be able to gain the positive values that these people are looking for. And only will we be able to win over those who are wavering on the issue of economics. And for those, we have a case to make, and my case is clear. Europe is in decline, it is a failed project, and the European dreams are failing because of membership of the European Union. Britain has not grown. Our economy is still damaged because of our membership of the European Union. The British economy is in danger, and this is caused by old parties who no longer have the solutions to the problems and look to the past instead of the future. We need to have a new economic liberalism that embraces the economies of the Commonwealth and other parts of the wider world to challenge the economic doctrines of stagnation and give people back hope. Now, after the last war, it was inevitable that with those who wanted to stop seeing the blood of their children across the lands of Europe. And with such lofty ideals, there were those who went away and conjured up the idea of a European federation. It was founded on the principles of ensuring poverty, hopelessness, and despair would no longer be part of the European ideal. The cry of federalism was strong. However, during this economic crisis, we saw a very different vision of Europe. I look at Greece, a country I know well and with friends that I have there, a nation brought low as it was engulfed by the weight of its mountainous debt, economic mismanagement, and the hubris of its politicians. One moment in particular brought home to me the torrid story of the failure in that country and the failure of the economic dream of Europe. On the 4th of April 2012, a 77-year-old retired pharmacist stood 100 yards from the Greek Parliament. There were passers-by who heard him say a few words, and I repeat, I have debts. I cannot stand it no more. I don't want to leave those debts to my children. A few minutes later, he shot himself. He shot himself on the steps of a country that founded freedom and democracy. And in his suicide note, he said, the government had annihilated hope. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the government in Greece and the governments of the EU have annihilated hope for 28% of the people in Greece who are unemployed. They have annihilated hope for the 61% of young people under the age of 25 without a job. Depressions are on the rise. Suicides are up by 40%. 85% of Greek students living abroad no longer want to go back to their homeland. The Greek debt stands at 340 billion, and if you took €1 side by side and added it together, it would go round the earth 1,800 times. That is the scale of the destruction the European Union has put upon that country, and it is scandalous. But it is not only Greece that has suffered. In Portugal, the scale of youth emigration is at all-time highs. At Lisbon's Portela airport, you often see up to 200 families leaving their country each day. And it's in a country where 41% of young women are unemployed. In Spain, they talk about a lost generation. A youth unemployment there is 50%. We can see what's happening in France. We see the debt in Italy. We see how crushed Ireland has been. The European economies are struggling under the weight of their debts and unemployment. The misery is unspeakable and unimaginable. Yes, the EU may have been created on lofty principles, but the results are clear. The economic system is a failure. And yet those in power have no solution except one thing. More Europe, you hear their cry. Perhaps they never heard the words of Albert Camus, who said, good intentions may do as much harm as malevolence if they lack understanding. Well, the EU lacks the understanding of the common people because they are in their lofty hierarchy of the European Union's institutions. But UKIP understands the people. We understand the failed economic model, and that to protect in our interest in this country, we must leave before we are engulfed in the same problems that they have. As there were dreamers in Europe, there are dreamers in Britain. They promote the European Union just as widely and as strongly. They have challenged UKIP and embarked on a scaremongering campaign this country has never seen for any political party before. They say 3 million jobs will be lost. Our car manufacturing would leave. You would see inward investment disappear. We would be the pariah state of the world. But just as in Europe there is a disconnect between the people and the politicians, there is a disconnect between their dream and the reality. In the letters page of the London Evening Standard last night, I read an article about a young student who'd got 1 degree and also got a PhD. He said he was struggling because he was having to work in shops and coffee shops and bars just to make ends meet. And whereas he wanted to have a real job, he was even finding those difficult to come by because the wages are suppressed and the competition from 4 million immigrants into this country, predominantly from the European Union, were making the living wage lower and his wages lower. That is unacceptable, but that is the cost of the dreamers who believe in the European Union. Now, we mustn't blame those people who want to come here because this is a great country and we've always opened the doors. My family are those who've come from a different country here, and I stand here before you as one of those who've benefited. But his story of hopelessness is not new. It is spread across the whole country, where we've seen the collapse of our farming and fishing industries, our coal and steel, the postal industries, affected by European Union regulation. We have watched as unemployment has stabilized at 7%. 3 million people accepted as normal to be unemployed. It's not acceptable to me, and it shouldn't be acceptable to you. These are not the signs of a prosperous union. These are the signs of a failing union. But if the human stories fail to convince you, then perhaps the numbers should. Every year since we've traded with the European Union, we have actually been in an economic deficit with them. This year to the tune of 30 billion, whilst we have a healthy trade of 16 billion with the rest of the world. Less than 15% of GDP is with the EU, but 100% of their regulations impact us. Research by my predecessor, who did such a wonderful job for us as the economic spokesman, Tim Congdon, shows that 10% of our GDP, or 120 billion a year, is what is the real cost of our membership of the European Union. This should be enough to persuade us that our membership is not an economic boom, but an economic albatross. The case for leaving is growing stronger every day. We are told that when Liam Byrne left, he left a note for George Osborne saying there was no money left. After over a decade in power, the Labour Party had managed to spend the country's income, spend our savings and assets, borrowed up to the hilt, pilloried our pension pots, sullied the lives of pensioners. As a scale of economic destruction, it was unmatched by any political party ever before. But for the party that prides itself on representing those on the breadline, the working class, the poor, this is the party that destroyed the grammar school system that gave opportunity of students like me to become a barrister. They put the death knell on training colleges that helped my uncle become a plumber and then a site manager. They opened a door to mass immigration from the European Union that drove down wages, as I said, that has made life harsher for my cousin, who's an electrician. Gordon Brown destroyed the pension system with which my aunt and uncle, as social workers, are now struggling to fight. And they've added green levies that increase our energy costs, so that my mother, instead of having to have a relaxing time as a pensioner, has to work part-time to supplement that just to keep the lights on in the house. As Ronald Reagan said, the left always say with a little more power and a little more money, we can do so much for the people. Well, they had a lot of power and a lot of money, and they did a lot for the people, their own people. But when the Conservatives came to power, David Cameron came to power with the maxim saying we're all in it together. Well, this is a speech he took, or I understood parts of it, from Bill Clinton's inaugural speech. But there's where the similarity ended. Because whereas a few years later, Bill Clinton was able to stand before the Senate and Congress and say, we are now only 10 billion in our deficit, and within this year we will have a balanced budget. The same cannot be said of David Cameron, because our debt is still over £1 trillion, and our deficit is still over £100 billion. It costs us more than some department budgets just to revalue our debt in the international markets. But there is another cost of Cameron, and that cost is that he's helped to improve the lives of the super wealthy in this country. Although I admit he's managed to help the lives by raising the tax thresholds for the poorest. But there are many on the borders of the 40% tax, the £32,000, those who have to get up hard in the morning and pay high bills for their travel to work on the trains, or high gas bills or high car bills to fill their tanks up, who know what it's like that if they earn a little bit more, they suddenly are in the 40% tax threshold, and certainly they're worse off. Well, UKIP says, you're not in it together, Mr. Cameron. You are making sure that they suffer, and we will ensure that we will do something to protect you. Ladies and gentlemen, today, by our presence here, all of us have made a commitment to join in battle to defend liberty and to reclaim this great nation from the steady, perilous advance of the EU. But let us not begin by recognizing the scale of the task before us, because the forces of illiberalism are strong. They permeate every part of the body politic, our politicians, the unions, the media. They have untold resources from the EU, funding from corporate entities, and they will put many of them on TV. They have inveigled our friends and our cousins across the globe that this new country, the new EU, is a beacon of hope and democracy. when we know that it is exactly the opposite, and it will snuff out the light of freedom. But they have not crushed rebellion yet. The spirit and hunger to control one's own destiny not only lies deep within the soul of the people of this country, but also those of Europe. Today's battle to win the hearts and minds will not be on the fields of Flanders, but airways and TV, in the studios and the papers, on the web, in the homes and our offices. It is here we must respond. It is here where we must set out the case for a positive future for Britain. One of increasing growth, of higher living standards, job security, better education and training. It is here where we set out the case for an independent Britain with UKIP at its helm. Thank you.